Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. On today's episode, we have a truly special guest, an artist who has redefined the boundaries of the banjo and transformed our understanding of its possibilities. I am, of course, talking about Béla Fleck, a name synonymous with innovation and mastery in the world of music. But before we begin, please consider subscribing to the channel by hitting the subscribe button. Here's my interview. Béla, welcome.
Good to be here with you at my house.
Nice to meet your house. I saw you open for Shakti. I made a video about it, and I was absolutely blown away. I've seen you play in the past with Flecktones. What's it like to come out and just play solo banjo like that?
Well, I love playing solo banjo. It's what I do most of my life. Mm-hmm. Honestly, you think about when you play music, usually you're by yourself practicing, and the time you're playing with a band is actually the smaller part. But you know, of course, those guys are just really important to me and in my development. Everything that they did when Shakti came out was a revelation, especially to the acoustic music world.
Yes.
But if I wasn't already a John McLaughlin fan, which I was, a Mahavishnu fan, coming up in that fusion world in New York City when I grew up and seeing that they would be playing at the Beacon Theater 2 blocks from where I lived, and of course Return to Forever, that whole world. So, you know, when he made that shift, when John left I guess fusion and went into this Indian direction, I loved it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people in the bluegrass world, it opened a lot of minds, you know, the possibilities of things we could do with our instruments. It was really something. So when I had the opportunity to be on these shows in any way, I was like, let's do it. My manager said, you won't be able to play these markets for another year if you do this, and you know, you'd make a lot more. I was like, this is something I just want to be there. I just want to see it. So for me, it was unnerving to some extent, knowing that John was there, whether he paid attention to me or not, just that he was in, you know, we were breathing some of the same air as we walked through the halls. And he was very nice to me. You know, we don't really have a long relationship. So in a way, that was another exciting thing about doing this, is I might get to know John. Like I really got to know Chick Corea, and he's of that stature, you know, for me. So John is of that stature for me, and it's always been very demoralizing to me to see what he can do, and I can't, because his fingers and his mind they're super powered. And then I was curious, what's it going to be like now? Because I heard he had stopped playing and had retired because his hands were bothering him, and then now he's back. And I had heard from Zakir, who I'm fortunate enough to have a relationship with, and I get to worship at his altar regularly, which I enjoy so much. He's one of the great effortless masters, and full of information that I don't possess, which people I like to be around, people who know things I don't. So some of them I can be inspired by. So anyway, Zakir said that John had a cure, and he was now back to maybe 80-90% of his original level, which meant he was willing to go out and play with Shakti. So I was like, this is a once-in-a-million chance to experience this thing. And so the first night, it was I had to fly from somewhere. I had to get up at 4 a.m. and show up in time, just in time to go on and stuff, and that was pretty petrifying. But they were kind. They weren't there, you know, looking to be super critical. They were just happy to hear something different happening before them. But as I thought about it, I said, what should I do? We talked about all kinds of things, the Flecktones, my bluegrass band, all these things, and I kept thinking, I think solo would be the best. And eventually, that's where we ended up, because I don't want a big band playing before I go on, you know, and this is very delicate, very beautiful, and it's intense, and it rocks, but it's still it's also very calm. It's calm and exciting at the same time, this music that they were playing. So if I started to think in terms of like what I wanted to do, rather than being about what I wanted to do, was I wanted to set the stage for them. What could I do by myself that would create energy and build, and then when they came on, it'd be, yeah. You know, you didn't just hear what you're about to hear. The opening act didn't play what the main act's going to play. Not that I ever could, but I like the idea of going out there. And then I also thought, you know, with Indian musicians and also a heavily Indian audience, there might be some patience for a soloist to come out, because in Indian music you have a sitar player come out and play for 2 hours solo, or even a Zakir does solo concerts that could be 3 to 4 hours long, and that audience is not so afraid of that sort of thing. So I figured I'm only playing 45 minutes. I didn't want to play any longer, and they didn't need anybody to play any longer. So I figured if I can keep an energy going for 45 minutes, keep it building and growing, and then we take a breath, and then these guys come out, and it felt like a good night.
It
of
was
music.
so appropriate.
Well, good,
Like,
because that was a big piece of what I was thinking about.
everything you played, the audience was so engaged when you were playing, and I thought it was the perfect complement to what they did. And I didn't know what they were going to do.
Yeah, I started to know what they were going to do, and as I got along and I got more and more comfortable, I started teasing with a few little things people might know. Which Zakir will do this. He'll be playing this incredible tabla solo that's just unbelievable time, rhythm, math, etc. And then all of a sudden he'll play the Lone Ranger's theme in the middle of it, and it's just a gift to the audience because they all laugh and then they get a fresh breath and then they're ready for the rest of this unbelievable solo. So I took a couple pages from that, and I think I played. Is it Black Dog, Led Zeppelin? I found a few little things because I knew there were also some guitar players out there that were just rock fusion guitar people, and that they might know some things. So I did a Beatles cover. I did a few things like that. Part of me really wanted to be Keith Jarrett and walk out there and improvise for 45 minutes straight with nothing, no songs, anything. And that someday I would like to do that. And I probably could have done that if I'd had the nerve on the first gig, because as I got toward the end of the tour, I did a lot more of that, and it felt really good, and I think they liked it too.
The power that you had with some of the climaxes in the pieces that you were playing rose to the energy after, I thought, wow, that's really amazing, the sound that's coming out of your banjo, and the harmony that you were playing too. This is
a lot of fun for me.
Talk about your approach to harmony and how it's and about how it works with the banjo.
I can be very free when it's just me, and if I do something, if I threw my hands onto the instrument somewhere and in almost any position, I could probably find some way to resolve it. If I just go. But that's a lot harder to do when you're improvising in a group setting with drums and bass and piano. This is the opportunity for that kind of thing. And I can go for quite a long time just like that. I hate the word noodling because it sounds like you don't know what you're doing. It's more of exploring. I think it's a kinder way to call noodling exploring. But I like to see what's going to happen, and I also like that when I do that, I never know what I'm going to do next, and I'm really on the spot. So my unconscious self kind of has to kick in, and some very last-minute decisions have to get made. My friend Edgar Meyer and I talk a lot about music, and we've talked about how there are certain things you can only get to by improvising, and there's certain things you can only get to by composing. And so I like to do both. But improvising, there's a focus. You're on the spot. There's pressure because there's an audience. So it's not just you sitting in a room, because you won't do the same thing in a room. I probably did something relatively okay because you were sitting here watching. I was playing it for you, but there's a focal point of an audience that centers an improvisation. So it's kind of like if a tree falls in the forest. Does it make a sound? It almost doesn't matter what you do in the practice room, even if you came up with the most brilliant thing, because nobody ever hears it, and it's just part of your practice. But when you go in front of people, again, it galvanizes you, and you dig in, and your unconscious kicks in and supplies a lot of stuff that you can't plan for. You just have to set yourself up with enough connective tissue ideas, enough stuff to work with, enough, and then you have to be inspired, But usually they'll take care of that, or the fact that John McLaughlin's backstage, whether he's listening or not.
Right.
That's enough for me to be like, want to be on my very best game.
I thought that there was a lot of the polyrhythmic ideas
right.
that you did that connected with the audience as well, that were
right.
that were ready to hear things like that.
Right.
Talk about how the banjo and doing rolls and your technique and allows you to do those kind of things.
Yeah, I've come to think of the banjo as a percussion instrument, like as a pitched percussion instrument. It was not unlike a marimba or vibes, and I'm sure we could think of a bunch of other ones. But because it has such a sharp attack, if I can refine my timing down to the kind of timing a percussionist might have or a drummer might have, then I can really play with time. And it gives me a lot. There are certainly a lot of limitations to this instrument that I can't get around, but there's also some strengths. And one of them is that sharp attack. Like, for one thing, you can hear a banjo, even it has a clarity to it, and that could either irritate you or it could help you cut through a big noisy situation. So there's some strengths there. But mostly I think it's a very digital instrument. especially if it's played precisely. So the great banjo players in bluegrass play precisely, but they're going. So Earl Scruggs or J.D. Crowe, they'd be like a metronome. They'd be rocking it, timing perfect, beautiful. But what if you take that and you do it in 5/4? Let's see. 2, 3, 4. I mean, you can really get a groove going. And it's very conducive to all kinds of odd meters. But you got to learn how to do it.
Right.
But it's a good instrument for that kind of stuff. So I think I always tend to connect really well with percussionists and drummers. Like Zakir and I had an easy time from the very beginning. Future Man and I immediately connected on time and rhythm, and we had a lot of fun with that.
There's a lot of close notes that you can do on the banjo that you can't do on the guitar. We talked about that a little bit before we started here.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Right, so the banjo tuning, which would appear to be a terrible tuning for all this kind of music, is an open G chord. And in the typical bluegrass tuning would be an open G chord. So the great thing about it is if you want to play a chord, there it is. You can do a bar chord and you can figure out where you are. So there's certainly good things. The open strings give you a lot of possibilities in the main key, as I showed you when I was playing that bluegrass example.
Yeah.
But the tuning is very close. So in other words, under my hand, I can get an octave and maybe 2 more notes in one position before I have to stretch to get a tenth, right?
Yeah.
So that's a ninth. Yeah, maybe I could, if I want to do that, or I could. Etc. But my point is, I can't get very far. So that's the downside. But the plus side is, because the notes are so close, I can get half steps so easily. I've got them here. I've got the 5th string, which is only, let's see, how could I put this? The 5th string is the same pitch as the 1st string. It just starts higher. So if you went up to the 1st string to the 5th fret, it's the same note, which means that is so easy. If I want to have 3 half steps, they're all over the place. So if I want to really be irritating, it's very, very simple. But so anyway, I gravitate to sounds that have those kind of dense chords where you can have you can have half steps in the chords. You just got to figure out where they are. You can't do them everywhere on the banjo. You have to do it where you have an open string to work with, or things. Again, not attractive to everybody, but useful in certain situations.
Yeah, and something that would be impossible on the guitar.
Right, to do it that way as easily, and very easy on the piano.
Yes.
But certain things really lay out.
Let's talk about scales and about how you do with single note playing and how difficult that is or how easy it is.
So, like a guitar, you can play across the instrument. Instead of using a pick, flat pick, I use my thumb and index back and forth for 16th notes. Pretty much just. So when you get into triplets, that gets more complicated because you have to, just like with a flat pick, you have to have a strategy for playing triplets. But occasionally I can use my 3rd finger and I could do a triplet like this, which is a forward roll, thumb index middle, and it's like nothing, like you might do on a piano, very easily. So there's one where I do 3 in a row and then stick the thumb on top. So, yeah. But in terms of the scales, I had nobody was really doing that when I came on the scene.
Right.
People played the banjo like this, and then there was this new fledgling idea of playing scales, a melodic. We call it melodic style, where you alternate strings. So instead of going up for the next note, you go down to a lower string. Then you get the next one open, and then you go to a lower string.
It's beautiful.
So that's basically alternating to get scales.
Beautiful.
But you can get these great rippling. So that was very common, and so people were learning to do scales in the open keys. I went to see Chick Corea and Return to Forever when I was 17 at the Beacon Theater, and I watched these guys play. It was Al Di Meola and Stanley Clarke, and of course, Lenny White was there and Chick. After the show, I came back to my house, which was only a couple of blocks away from there, and I was just thinking, God, every note those guys played is on my banjo somewhere. How come I don't know where any of those notes are? How will I find these notes? And so that night I sat up and I started figuring out that I could play these scales. Basically, I just started working on the modes. And I stayed up all night and started mapping out these things. Then I realized, well, I got to learn them in every key. I got to learn the minor ones. And then I started finding out about the altered scales, and I started learning that I had this real book I had gotten somewhere, and I started, well, I don't know what any of these chords are, and just started figuring them out. And so at the end of things, of learning the banjo that way, I had a very different a different understanding of the whole neck, rather than the very positional playing. Whether when you're in bluegrass, you're either in the open key, the first inversion, second inversion, and then it repeats. So you might throw some stuff in, but it's very position playing. And even with the melodic style, also very position playing, because you're stuck in whatever key you're in. So if the G scales are great. What happens when I get to G sharp? What am I going to go? It's not practical. So how am I going to play in these other keys? So that's when this became really helpful. Then I started doing the alternating thirds, then fourths, and then even fifths, and sixths, sevenths, and finally octave. And I did these in every key, and at the end of all of that, I had a much better understanding of how the neck worked. And then I had access to a lot of music that I wasn't able to play on the banjo before, and that people had a harder time. They could only play in certain keys. I could play in any key. It wouldn't necessarily be pretty, but I had the potential. If I had a G flat chord, it wasn't a nightmare. I could find a way to play it, and I had a better sense of how it fit into the whole grid system of the banjo neck.
And how do you, if you're playing over, let's say, a 2-5-1 in a key,
yeah,
and how do you pick out what notes to play in the voicings, and how do you?
Right. Well, you know, as I got to know more about jazz, I discovered that most people, if they have an A minor to D7, that most people don't go. They might go. You know, you pick 3 or 4 notes.
Yeah.
And so the coolest compers didn't play big chords. So I thought, well, and then when I heard Chick Corea playing also, he was just such a judicious player. He played with a lot of rhythm. The rhythm was as important as the notes. And a lot of times there were these little jabs. I was like, I think I could do that.
Yeah.
I can play 3 notes. Because that's all I can play at one time, unless I start strumming, which is against my religion. But yeah, so I you know, you can pluck 3, and usually that's enough, especially if you're in a band, someone's playing bass. You know, maybe you want to stay out of all the notes they're playing. With the Flecktones, we were conversational enough about our music that we could discuss it. Okay, Victor, you're going to be in, you can play these notes on this chord, and I'm going to be in these notes, and we're going to create the sound of a piano between the two of us. And that worked well, because we had these regions of the harmony that we were responsible for, and that we could be free in. But it would work, especially when Howard was playing harmonica. Mm-hmm. And when he was at the piano, it was a different story. We were more of a conventional band with a banjo in it.
Right.
Because it freed us in certain ways, but it also limited us in certain ways. And when he was on the harp, the harmony was all me and Victor. So we could really have a lot of... and when you listen back to that stuff, you know, it's not such complicated stuff. It's just very particular what we chose to do, and that's what gives it its color and its own sound, I think.
You were also playing here when you're warming up. You're playing the augmented sounds, augmented scale, and things like that.
Right.
So those types of scales, diminished scales, because you were doing all of this type of harmony in the pieces that you were playing live. Talk about kind of developing those type of sounds. I mean, beyond the major scales and things.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is like voice leading.
Yeah.
Like, because if you're playing and you change one note, then now you're in a great place to move to somewhere else. all I do. Oh, nice. We'll end on F. But part of it is I know enough about what's there to have. I've got some strategies now how to get through that kind of stuff. But it also came very naturally. I've always just enjoyed just moving a finger and seeing what happened. But then what? That's the problem. So and in terms of really knowing what I'm doing, I mean, a lot of it is intuitive, and I can kind of identify it, but I don't quite know what I'm going to do. And I hope that's a positive because I'm kind of stuck. That's what I am. Now, there's some people who play and they know exactly what they're doing and why it works. I'm pretty convinced it's going to work, but I'm not exactly sure why. But then afterward, I could go back and figure out, oh, well, that's why it worked, and that's why I knew it would work, because it's connected.
So you did a version of Rhapsody in Blue. You have a new record coming out.
Yeah.
On February 12th, the 100th anniversary.
That's right. Taking the banjo out of the rhythm section, putting it up front, because banjo was in the original piece, but just strumming.
Which is illegal.
In this basement, strumming the banjo is
okay. So how did you come up
highly
with
unpopular.
How did you come up with the arrangement for this
Right.
record that's going to be coming out?
Okay, so here's what happened. This is really kind of interesting. Well, it could be a long story or short, depending on how you edit it, which is fine with me. But it all started in New York City when I was maybe 5, 7, 8 years old. My uncle Steve took me to see old movies at a place called Thalia. It's out next to the Symphony Space. Used to be the Symphony Theater. And one time he took me and we'd see Marx Brothers movies, and we'd see Fred Astaire and all this kind of stuff. He was just showing us how great all that stuff was, which I loved. I just loved. So one day he took us to see Rhapsody in Blue, and it was one of those aha moments where, like, oh, I was so blown away by that movie. I'm sure if I looked at it now, it's probably a crap movie, but I've heard people say it's not a great movie, but I haven't seen it since then. All I know is the piece knocked me out. George Gershwin knocked me out. It was just sort of, I wasn't really a musician yet, and it had a big impact. So through the years, I always kept in touch with it. Like every once in a while, I'd go listen to a recording and I go, God, I wish I could play something like that on the banjo. That's just so cool, but it ain't gonna happen. And even in fact, when I was a senior in high school, I was in the chorus because they had to put me somewhere in school, and I couldn't play any legit instruments. I got a call from the principal to come up and talk to them in my senior year, and I thought I was going to be expelled or something. But they said, the semi-annual, the final concert is going to be Rhapsody in Blue, and we found this banjo part in there in the score with all the other parts. Do you think you could play this? Because if you can, you could get out of chorus till you're out of school. And I was like, I think I can, and I'll stay in chorus. So because by that time, there was probably some girls I was in love with, or for some reason I didn't want to go. So that was my first experience with it. And I had the banjo part, the original banjo part, which is, again, some strum stuff. I could never play a note of it and make a sense of it. And even on the performance, I didn't know what I was doing. But anyway, as part of the Rhapsody pull, I loved the piece, and I thought it was cool. And now I'd been on stage with an orchestra doing it, even though I couldn't play the banjo part on this instrument. It's the wrong banjo, even if I could read, which I can't. So as years went by, I kept listening to it, occasionally loving it, and going, I'd love to know how to do that. And then the pandemic came. But before the pandemic, I was fortunate enough to connect with my wife, Abigail Washburn, who's the best thing that ever happened to me since this. And at any rate, she went to Colorado College, and there was a guy who went to Colorado College with her named Ryan Benale. And he had written a book about Rhapsody in Blue called Arranging Gershwin. And so when we were there, and she did the commencement speech,
okay.
and this guy said, oh, I just thought I'd give you this book, since he knew Abby and stuff, and he gave me the book. And I was like, oh man, I love Rhapsody in Blue. So I read this book, and it's all about all these different ways people have done it over the years. It's all about Gershwin writing it on the train, and up to Boston and coming back, and in the last 2 weeks before it was due, realizing it was due, and he better go ahead and write it if he was going to have a show, and all this stuff. So that was fascinating to me. And then the pandemic hits, and I'm stuck in this basement. I do have my family. I wasn't stuck. I mean, I needed to do a certain amount of work on something just for my sanity. Mm-hmm. And so I got in touch with Ryan and asked him if he had, if there's any chance he could find me a score for the piece. And he sent me the original score, the marked up Paul Whiteman score, which I looked at it for a while, and I was like, okay, this is great, but I still can't read. So is there any chance you could get me a Sibelius file of it, which would have there's banjo tablature in Sibelius, so I can copy and paste the piano score and put it on a banjo and look at numbers, which I can relate to.
Right.
Again, because a D could be here, 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 or here, and the tuning is such that so many different ways to play the same note. Sight reading is a nightmare on the banjo. I need to know where the note is more than I need to know what it is,
Right.
which is part of why my grasp of harmony is suspect, because I don't always know what I'm playing. I just know what it sounds like. So at any rate, he gets me a Sibelius file, and I start looking at the piano part, and I had to copy it onto 3 banjos because there's so much in that piano part with 10 fingers all the time. Some of it was very dense.
Yes.
So I copied it onto 3, and I would erase the parts that were on the other ones. So very, very workaround, do-it-yourself kind of work. But eventually I got, the first phrase, and I figured out, oh, okay, I got to play the melody. What else can I get? I've only got 3 fingers to pluck. What can I do? And I figured out, and I got the first measure. I was like, oh, that's cool. I can play the first measure of Rhapsody in Blue. Isn't that cool? I was really thrilled, after all those years. And then as the pandemic went on, each week I'd work on another measure. Sometimes it would take me 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Sometimes it would happen in an afternoon, and I'd get a workable version of each measure. And after some time, I don't know, 6 months, a year, this pet project of mine I was doing really just for me, I could say that some version of Rhapsody in Blue could be played on the banjo. I couldn't play it yet, and what I had created was only the beginning of the manuscript it would need to be for me to play it. It was a lot that would have to happen. Right around that time, I got a call from Alan Valentine, who is the CEO of the Nashville Symphony, and I've done concertos for him, and we're friendly, and he'd asked me about something. Maybe he wanted a signed banjo for a benefit or something like that, and I said, oh, by the way, you're going to think this is funny, but I'm working on Rhapsody in Blue piano part. I think I'm going to try to figure out if it's possible to play. He said, great idea. We'll book it for the opening of the season in September, coming up in 9 months from now. I was like, oh, okay. So now I had a time limit. I had to learn it, and I had to get it together and figure out how to play it. And so I did. I just did the work to do it. And then when I realized that I was going to be doing all this work and that it was about to be the 100th anniversary of the piece, that I should record it while my fingers knew it, while my brain and because as hard as it was going to be to learn, I better get it down. So, because that's most of the work. If you can get something up to a point where you can play it in front of a symphony, you're pretty much
much there.
If you wait a year, you're going to have to get it all back.
Right.
It's all going to go away, and you're going to be going back to square one and trying to get it all back. So we managed to pull it off. We got it recorded, and then I started thinking about this Rhapsody in Bluegrass. Oh, what a terrible, horrible thing occurred to me, And so I didn't tell anybody about this idea that was going through my head, but I called Brian Sutton. You know who Brian is?
Yeah.
Great guitar player, and he's in my Bluegrass Heart, which is this bluegrass ensemble. I haven't played bluegrass for 23 years, but this year I brought a bluegrass ensemble out and really had an incredible time doing it with Sierra Hull, Michael Cleveland, Mark Schatz. A lot of great people played. So at any rate, I said, can you just come over to the house for a couple of hours, and didn't tell anybody what we were doing. And I wrote out like a chord chart of like what guitar might do if I was playing the banjo part. And so we just got it out and started playing through the piece and jotting down chord changes and making a few arrangement ideas. And to my surprise, it sounded great. As soon as he started playing Tony Rice style rhythm, which is a profound style of rhythm bluegrass guitar, all of a sudden, once again, I could say, this could be done and it could be good and it wouldn't be bad. It wouldn't be bad. It doesn't have to be a horrible idea. And because it sounds like a horrible idea, maybe we should do it because, nobody's expecting anything good out of it. So that's a nice place to be when you're making art. If nobody. That's the great thing about playing banjo. Nobody expects it to be any good. So if I do something that's a little better than half-assed, they think it's awesome. Like you, for instance.
Well, when you played Rhapsody in Blue, I thought,
yeah.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. Especially with the amount of notes that the original has, and then you're limiting it to the 5 strings here and it was such a creative, beautiful. Could you play a little bit of it?
I can try.
Okay.
Yeah. There's some of it.
That is amazing. Some of the linear things that go up the neck, and then the voice leading when you do the contrary motion, those sections are so...
it's like you have to use everything we've talked about.
Yeah.
About banjo playing to get through that, because some of it you're doing the melodic style, like this stuff.
That's
all technically.
That sounds so good.
Thank you.
And
well, the hope is that when you move it over, that it brings out something different in the piece. And the best thing that someone could say is it sounded right, like it was supposed to be on the banjo, not like it's been forced onto it and it doesn't really fit. But that's what I'm going for, is just for it to sound like it's supposed to be there.
It sounded to me like it was a banjo, like it was written for the banjo when you played it.
It was a banjo time. Remember, this was when that piece was written. It was a banjo time. Banjo was the most popular instrument in that part of the world at that time. There were banjo orchestras. It was part of Louis Armstrong's music, Jelly Roll Morton's music. There was folk music, there was early blues that was played on the banjo.
Yeah.
Of course, all this African stuff, because the banjo coming from Africa, it was in folk music and pre-bluegrass, old-time music, all of these different fiddle music, all this different stuff. The banjo was everywhere, and their guitar was really not on the scene.
Right.
And at some point I met a guy named Danny Barker. I don't know if you know about Danny Barker, but he was a banjo player who played with Cab Calloway. And he was there when all this stuff happened. He said that a record came out, a jazz record, and instead of banjo, someone played a guitar. And nobody really heard guitar before. It was a new thing. And he said the minute it happened, it was like every banjo player was out of work. Every single one. Nobody wanted the banjo anymore, because there was this whole connotation of the banjo as being something that white folks used to make fun of black people with. They put on blackface, get out banjos, and sing some songs about how great it was on the old plantation, as if it was great on the old plantation for the black folks. That was pretty distasteful. So this banjo, unfortunately, that actually belongs to those folks, became connected to their oppressors. And that's really unfortunate for the instrument, and also should be part of their culture. It's theirs, In fact, Gibson makes a thing, I don't know if anybody out there has ever heard of a tenor guitar, but a tenor guitar is a 4-string guitar, and Gibson made this for all the banjo players that were out of work so they could play in a banjo tuning and play guitar while they made their transition to learning to play guitar. And this guy, Danny Barker, eventually learned to play 6-string guitar and didn't play banjo for many years. And then he was playing guitar for Cab Calloway, and the Vega company said, hey, we'll give you a free banjo if you will play it on one song in the Cab Calloway show. And he went to Cab, and Cab said, no, sir, we've been trying to get away from that thing for a long time, and we don't want it back now. So he wouldn't let him play it. So that's where black people were at with it at that point. And so a lot of black folks have no idea that the banjo is African heritage.
We talked about playing Bach on the banjo.
It's the best music ever, and it traverses the keys so beautifully and uses all the notes in a time when nobody was writing that way, and nobody has done it any better. Like the first guy on the block knew what to do somehow, right? Like Earl Scruggs coming along, being the first guy to play the banjo with the 3 fingers, and nobody really has ever touched him. I would say Bach was the Earl Scruggs of harmony. But some people might like Bach better than Earl Scruggs. I would understand that too. Yeah.
But the challenges of playing things like that on the banjo.
Okay, back to the banjo. So the thing is, again, we have this problem that I can't get too much under my hands.
Right.
Right, I can only get an octave or so. This stuff's going to go all over an instrument. The other problem is that unlike something like, for instance, Paganini, you don't want to change the octaves to get it on the instrument, because there's so much logic to Bach's music that if you suddenly drop an octave, you've kind of maybe you just shouldn't play that piece.
The voice leading or whatever.
It just does. It destroys the whole direction. So for me, it's always been about finding a Bach piece that fits the range that I can get from here to here.
Right.
So and change. If I have to change 1 or 2 notes, they have to be notes that can be changed and they don't destroy the piece. So I have a few of them that I play. They're the best finger exercises I can think of, and they also teach me about music and where things lay on the instrument. I'll play one.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah. Beautiful.
That teaches me so much about the banjo because all of these things, just take any section. That's like a fingering exercise, like from God, literally.
Yeah.
It teaches me so much about how to get around the instrument. It teaches me, there's a minor scale, and what I have was that, like minor 6, and then another minor 6. It just teaches me so much. Something like those kinds of things that are all through Bach stuff. They're all things that can be used in jazz and bluegrass even, but they teach me about the fingerboard in a way that Scruggs style doesn't, melodic style doesn't, and even my regular scale work, which tends to be, foolishly on my part, in positions. It teaches me how to get out of the positions and play real music. So I find it to be real helpful.
Now, we talked about Charlie Parker and Bach
Yeah.
and the kind of the similarity between the two.
They feel similar to me, yeah. The logic of Charlie Parker's lines and the way he gets through chord changes, it feels like it couldn't be any other note. You know. Now he also, when you study it more closely, you see all of the subtlety in it. It's not da 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 da. He's got a lot of phrasing in there as well that really gives it a lot of class and interest and blue notes and different things. But still, I think there's something very marked about that. And I've heard of other players. I'm thinking of Jimmy Rainey. You know,
Yes, of course.
He felt like Bach to me when he soloed over jazz changes. It was like the lines were very much could have come out of a partita. It was just so perfect, and he could play unending lines through any jazz song with elegance and beautiful voice leading and great intervallic leaps that were always lovely. And also the other thing about Bach is there's just so much of it. If you think about somebody who's outputting genius stuff from, the first we know of, and all the way to his death every day, more and more and more. It's like if you haven't heard any good Bach, it's because you haven't looked, because there's so much stuff nobody knows about even. So much stuff. So inspiring cat, for sure.
How do you work on new things? Is there a challenging thing that you're working on, or are you kind of constantly reviving things from past that you want to play at concerts?
Well, sometimes I'm practicing things and it turns into like developing a technique, trying to find a way to make something, give me more options for either composing or improvising with, But usually it's very much based on what I have next, what's coming at me. And usually I've kept my schedule so full of challenging things that I have to be ready. So the first record I did with Corea, I'm amazed I can say the first record, because now there's going to be 3 that we got to do together, but he's my hero for so many musical reasons and personal. He was just a beautiful guy. But I remember we finished the first record, which was called The Enchantment. We put the instruments in the cases. I put mine in the cases. He immediately went into the other room and got out the score for the next thing he was going to work on. He didn't even go home and didn't even want to go get a drink or go get a meal. He was like, "All right, Béla, nice job."
On to the next.
And I've always loved that. I've always thought that was so badass. So like when I get done with the gig, Victor would always say, "I don't understand why you practice after gigs. Like after a show is done, I'll go to the back of the bus or I'll go back in the dressing room and I'll put on the metronome. It's like my hands are working better than they've worked all day. The things are really flowing, and there's things that I didn't get that night that I'm disappointed in, or I've got something coming up next week that I got to be ready for. And yeah, when you've been playing you've already done a sound check for an hour and a half and a 3-hour show, your hands are working good.
Yeah.
And your brain is working in a way it doesn't the rest of the day. So I always like that. I always like having something else I'm working on. And I think that's gotten me through a lot of touring, traveling, because it's not just what I'm doing that day, because that becomes tiresome. No matter what you're doing, you're playing with the best musicians, you're playing the same set every day for 6 months, a year. You start to lose that enthusiasm, or you could do it in your sleep, basically. You don't need to practice. But if you've got something coming, then you can be doing two things at once, and they're both interesting. Then when you go back to the thing you're doing now, it's more interesting because of the stuff you're practicing for the other thing, and then you've got something to look forward to. So I find it to be a lot of fun. Now, I do have kids, as I know you do, and so that's definitely changed the practicing thing. So more and more, it's desperation practice. Uh-oh. I got home and I didn't touch the banjo for a week, and now I got to play the concerto number 3 or whatever, or I'm going to play with, or the Flecktones when we got back together this year, or all the different things. They all require more rehearsal than they used to for me.
Well, as you get older and you have this body of work, and then you're constantly going back, you're playing different things. There's so much stuff to kind of remember.
It's nice if you've done it before, though, because it is going to come back quicker than you think. I can't have ever have done this. That couldn't have been me. But then 2 days later, it's like the memory, the muscle memory, the brain memory, the hand memory, everything starts to come back, and then you can do it. But if it's something brand new, there's a lot more work to do just to be ready, because you don't know whether you've got it really or not till you get with the other musicians. And usually I find that I'm over-practiced, but sometimes not. And you can only get there by learning on the bandstand, as they say in the jazz world, which I've luckily been able to do a lot with Chick and with Zakir as being some of my heroes that have a lot of information that I don't have. Being around it starts to soak up, and you soak up enough of it to be able to converse with them. And if they're kind, because they could plow you under if they felt like it, that's not their intention as musicians. They want to have a conversation, so they're going to come speak some of your language too. And that's very, very kind.
The first time you played with Chick, were you nervous?
Yeah.
What was that like?
The first time we played together was, I invited him to play on a couple of tracks of my album, and he said yes, and I was surprised, honestly. But I'd met him at the Grammys, and he was super nice in that setting. The Flecktones and I were there. Victor and Future Man were there with me, and we just ran into him, and we were all just hanging out. That's as you do there, because you end up in a big ballroom full of people that play all kinds of music, and pretty soon you find the people that have something in common with you. And so Chick and Gail were there, and we ended up sort of sitting together and hanging, and it was real nice. So I'll take a shot at this. I said, hey, sent a note through his management. Hey, is there any chance you would consider playing on a track or two for me? Sure, no problem. Oh my God. So I came to L.A. and I got to record 3 tracks with him, and it was just, I couldn't believe that. It was, for one thing, it's one of those things, again, where he transcends what you would hoped it would be. It's so much better than I had imagined it might be. Playing with him he lifted you up. Earl Scruggs was said to do that a lot. When he would walk into a room even, people would just start playing better. But so after that, I was never going to bother him again. I was like, okay, I got to play with Chick Corea. He played on my record. I'm never going to bother him. But then he got in touch with me about doing some duo stuff. And that's the story. But the first time, it was a very charged moment. It was at Mad Hatter Studios, learning music with your hero and my music, and him having to learn it, and me throwing it at him, and just a very spontaneous. But when you're in that pressure cooker, people tend to deliver. So I was well rehearsed, and he was just great. He was just good enough that he didn't have to be. So it worked out to be a really nice recording.
You have another record coming out that...
Yeah, we did a last project together before he passed that's going to be coming out. Yeah. It's poignant. Yeah. He was a real friend, and a hero and a friend. It was really cool that I got to know him that way. The last project was we were out on tour playing, doing duo stuff, and we both brought new music to the last tour, which was something we really kind of needed to do because we've been playing that Enchantment record for 12 years, something like that. But we would only get together twice a year for a week or two, so it wasn't like the music was worn out. But still, it was time. The years had just marched on, so we both showed up with tunes and played them on the tour. And at the end of the tour, I said, I'll come to Florida and we can lay him down. He said, we just did. Because he knew that the live thing was going to have something that, and also, I'm not going to say he was lazy, but he just didn't see the point. He just felt like we had done it.
You played it.
And yeah, it's there. He said, you're the producer, go listen. If you don't think it's there, we can talk about you coming down. But I went and listened during the pandemic and discovered it was there. And then we did some collaborating during the pandemic where he would send me music and I would put banjo on it and I'd send him stuff and he would do it. And we actually came up with some really, maybe some more ornate stuff than we would have done if we'd been rehearsing it up, because it was all like a chart. It sounds like we're playing it together.
Is that anything that eventually will come out, you think?
Yeah. Yeah, that stuff's going to come out this spring. And I'm really happy that before he passed, we actually broke into a whole other musical area. We kind of shook up that duo and kicked it upstairs. I think we really covered some new ground this time. So I'm proud of that. I really am.
If I asked you if there were people that you wish you could have played with, who are some of the people that you wish you could have played with?
You know, as time goes on, it's not so much that I want to play with them. I just would like to hear them or maybe know them a little bit. I don't feel like it has to be me anymore, you know. But yeah, you know, going back, it would have been great to go sit and watch Bach write, or go sit in a smoky club and watch Coltrane play, or Charlie Parker play. Or I mean, there's some jazz players that I'm of course love, Herbie, Pat Metheny, you know, so many great players that I haven't ever done anything with, and if that happened, that would be great. But it doesn't need to.
Right.
It would be lovely.
You're
just I'm such a fan.
Yeah. Content being a fan.
Yeah, and you know, to tell you the truth, the connection Chick and I had was very rhythmic based because of the way he played, and maybe someone like Keith, you know, or Herbie, maybe we wouldn't be as well suited as Chick and I were. So, but I think it would be incredible to play with those guys. There's so many great players on all the instruments. You never run out of stuff to do. But I like doing things that haven't been done whenever possible. So if there's a direction, a combination, I like playing with people from different parts of the world. I like trying to find a way for the banjo to sit in a classical situation. That's kind of my mission statement.
What's something that music that you would listen to that people might not think you would enjoy?
I love Barbra Streisand.
Okay.
I know Pat Metheny said he really liked the Carpenters.
Okay.
You know?
What's wrong with either of them?
Nothing, but you don't see the similarity between my own work and them.
Right.
Joni Mitchell, we were talking about, you have had a great experience with her, getting to know her a bit. I never met her, but boy, some of her records have been really important to me.
When you were growing up, did your parents, you're from New York, did your parents play any particular music that you really connected with?
You mean like on the stereo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, listen to music at home.
So my mother and my father split up when I was around 1 or 2, and my father was not on the scene. I didn't meet him until I was in my 40s.
Okay.
So, but he gave me all these names. He named me after all of these classical composers: Béla Anton Leos Fleck, so Béla Bartók, Anton Chekhov, and Leos Janáček. So some pretty mangy composers, really.
Yeah.
So he wasn't around to pass on his love of that music, but he gave me those names. And then, and my brother, unfortunately, he got Ludwig. He was named after Beethoven. That's a tough name. So he
tough.
Still goes by Louis. But at any rate, my mother married, I think when I was 15 or maybe even 16, she married a cellist who was, he liked more kind of, what's the word, more mainstream classical music. You know, he liked a lot of Brahms and Beethoven and Handel, and you know, so there was classical influence around, and I would listen to it. He would have people over to play string quartets, and I would get out the music and look at it, and I'd usually fall asleep. But I liked it, but it didn't call out to me in particular. But yet, years later, when I found myself getting to know someone like Edgar Meyer or Joshua Bell, it came in handy because I had some idea of what that music was supposed to sound like, and I could imagine it. Edgar's a real big part of my life because he plays an upright bass, right? So he plays it in a way, he's so good at it, there really isn't the repertoire for him to play. Where if you're a great violinist, there's tons of great material for it. Yeah. If you're a great pianist, cellist, there's a great repertoire. So he's had to create his own, find his own way to play stuff that's at the level of his technique. So for me, he's a great person to talk to about taking an instrument that has no place in classical music, because playing those pieces on upright bass is equally unusual. And so he's been a lot of help in thinking about fingerings and thinking about how to, what kind of license you can really take where you should and where you shouldn't. And great composer to encourage me to write and to think about an orchestra as an option.
You started on the guitar, though, before you
did.
picked up the banjo. And what kind of stuff were you playing on the guitar?
Right, so I heard the banjo before I got the guitar, and I fell in love with it on the Beverly Hillbillies. Thought it was just unbelievable, but I never told anybody, and I never thought I could ever play it, so I never mentioned it. It was a secret. But it turned out that my mother, who had played some camp, she was a camp counselor for a while, and she had played some folk songs, some kumbaya type stuff. So I begged her to teach me to play guitar, which she said no for a long time. But finally she bent, and we went and got a couple of classical guitars to play, gut string guitars, and I started taking some guitar lessons. And then I had the Beatles books with the chord charts written in them. I tried to figure out the chords, and then eventually there's a guy upstairs in the building who gives guitar lessons. So he was an electric guitar player. He started teaching me the blues scale in all the inversions. So when I came to the banjo, I was used to this idea of scales and inversions, which was very helpful. But I would never have gotten a banjo if it wasn't for my grandfather bought one at a garage sale, and he said, "Oh, you like the guitar? I saw this. I got it. Maybe you'd like it." And I was like, "Oh my God, there it is!" I had never told him or anybody that it was my favorite instrument, because I never thought I could play it. So all of a sudden, it was deposited in my hands, and I just went to town.
And how long before you could play the Ballad of Jed Clampett?
That was pretty quick. But the question is, how well was I playing it? It takes a while to get smooth with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of, first you just have to start super simple with the basic rolls. We call the rolls the arpeggios that you can play with, with the right hand. So a roll might be. First you learn that, and then you learn to change chords. Just those, two hand positions, because one's open, and one roll is enough to get you going.
Yeah.
So then I started going to folk hootenannies, and I'd sit in the back with my banjo, and I'd do the two rolls I knew. The other one I knew. That's called the forward-backward roll.
Okay.
Because you go forward, thumb, index, middle, hit your thumb, and then you come backward, middle, index, thumb. 8 notes. And the other was the thumb in and the thumb out roll, which goes like this. So I could, armed with that in my arsenal, I could go irritate a whole room full of folkies.
Now, your wife plays a different style.
Yeah.
Is it clawhammer?
She's a clawhammer player. Yeah. There's a lot of different names for it. Frailing, clawhammer, drop thumb.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she where I'm using 3 finger picks, 2 metal picks on my first and second finger, and a thumb pick, which happens to have a metal casing but is a plastic pick on the end.
Interesting.
So I pluck up with these fingers and down with my thumb towards each other. With clawhammer, you go down with your fingernails. You don't use picks at all. Down with your fingernails and pluck with the thumb. So it's down, pluck, and she's great at it. So I don't do that around the house.
You haven't
She's got
played
it down.
that way at all, though. Really.
I tried a little bit when I was wooing her, and then it suddenly dawned on me that I didn't need to be doing that. She was great at it, and I should.
Now, does she play 3 finger ever?
She doesn't do 3 finger. She does a 2 finger, which came before 3 finger. Yeah, in that world. It's ironic because these very simple folk styles that were happening, well, deceptively simple because they're harder than you think. They might seem pretty remedial if you think of the fact that on 4-string banjo people were playing ragtime music and early jazz and all kinds of chord changes and all kinds of stuff. It's quite different. But these folk styles got so sophisticated and so curious and interesting, and there's so much in them. So she's into that. She's into the history. She's into something called round peak style, which is a style we're pretty sure maybe originated in the Gambia. Mm-hmm. It came over somehow and ended up in North Carolina, became a predominant style of a certain region. But if you go to different regions of like North Carolina, you'll find different clawhammer styles.
I've listened to you two play together, and it's fascinating to hear the 2 different styles played simultaneously.
Yeah, it's harder than you'd think. I mean, we're both rippling, so it's two people rippling, doing their versions of rippling, and you're trying to figure out how to lock those ripples together.
Yeah.
I mean, old-time music is kind of relaxed. So, for instance, if you looked at it, if you thought about a metronome, you might be on the back end of that beat. You think about drummers that play on the back end of the beat, or drummers that play on the front end of the beat. Bluegrass is almost always on the front end of the beat, although it doesn't have to be metronomic. It can slow down a little at the chorus and pick back up for the solos. It's still charging. Song's probably going to end faster than it started. Old-time music might end up slower, and it's fine. So taking our 2 points of view and getting them together was not the easiest in the beginning. We had to kind of we had to both creep up on the metronome from opposite directions.
That's fascinating.
And once we got there, we learned how to listen to each other, and I learned to relax a little bit, and she learned to push a little bit. We found our center. And then we started building arrangement for songs using different kinds of banjos. Maybe I'd use a baritone banjo. I could play under her, or take a bass roll, or a cello banjo, or she'd play the cello banjo, and I'd use a piccolo banjo. And so we started building this whole little set of songs that used the different kinds of banjos. And we honestly couldn't think of a banjo duo that did. I mean, maybe someone would do it for a couple of songs. Doc Watson would maybe do it with Merle Watson for one song, or other people we know would do that for a special song. But there was no double banjo band. So in a weird way, it was as challenging as trying to figure out how to play a duo with a kora player, or, figure out how to play with Chick Corea, the first time, or the first decade. There's a whole different set of challenges. You're just trying to make complete music with whatever person you find yourself collaborating with.
Béla, you have a lot of banjos around here, but one in particular is sitting right over there. That is the most insane looking thing, this bass banjo. What's the story with that?
The best thing about the story is, just to show you what a good match Abigail and I are, is I called her up from, I think it was upstate New York, this great store, and I said, Abby, they have a bass banjo here in this store. And she said, don't come home without it. And I knew she was the one for me. It's the second bass banjo I've run across. It's actually in the same store.
Wait, what is the store in upstate New York?
It's in Rochester.
Okay.
It's Bernunzio's.
Okay, I'm from Rochester.
Okay, so right behind the hall there, where they do the concerts at the school, Eastman School.
Eastman, yep.
But right behind in the alley, if you walk out the alley to the street, you see all these banjos in the window, and this guy has just a bunch of phenomenal old banjos and stuff, and for some reason that's where he is. And so one day I was walking around, before sound check, and oh my God, I didn't know this place was here. I'd heard about it. I didn't know where it was, and I went in and I've never gone there and not come out with a banjo.
The case is amazing. I mean, the case is as impressive as the banjo.
The case is wild. So he told me that the banjo was from 1905,
okay,
back in the day when banjo was king.
Yeah.
And it was commissioned for a vaudeville group, a banjo quartet of women. And I don't remember what the name of or maybe we didn't even know what the name of the group was, but it's a copy of A White Lady. So it was 4 ladies, and I believe they all played white lady banjos, and they commissioned this giant bass banjo. So now we have it.
Béla, what makes a great banjo? What do you look for in a banjo?
A lot of times people have a perception of banjos being super bright and crisp. I like banjos that have some depth, so there's something supporting. I mean, you need the brightness, especially if you're playing in a group and you want to be heard. You can't be too dark, or you just disappear. You just don't hear the instrument. But I like for it to have the potential to have some body and some depth. The other thing about banjos is some of them are not responsive. They sound really good if you play at a flat.
What do you mean by not?
So they have dynamically, when you start to hit them hard, they have no place to go. They don't go any further. You hit a wall. It's like you're being compressed by the instrument because it doesn't have any more to give. And so when you get into these instruments like the one I play here, this is a pre-war 1937 to 1940 Gibson Style 75. It's called a Style 75 because it cost $75 back then. Now it would be at least a $100,000 banjo. These instruments from that period, that Gibson period of the great master tones, which Earl Scruggs played as well, they keep giving. You hit it harder, you get more. And more than any other banjo I've ever played. And that's really satisfying. You can play it soft and it's lovely, and you can, depending on how you tighten the head, you can get a beautiful bell sound out of it, or you can have a rich, gaudy sound out of it, but the dynamic potential is greater. And I think you find that with acoustic guitars. Sometimes you have a beautiful guitar, you play it in the shop, and you try to play it with people, and it just doesn't give it. It doesn't give it.
Yeah.
And pianos, too. You know, some of them just don't go any further when you hit them harder, and they're no fun because you can't. You're stuck here, between here and here. You can't go to there.
Does this have an ebony fingerboard on it?
I think so, yeah.
And
the neck was made by a great luthier named John Monteleone, because the necks from the 1930s aren't necessarily going to hold up as well as the pot. We call this part the pot, which is like the drum. But the necks, they were also almost always flat fingerboards until the 40s. And this builder who makes a lot of great guitars, I don't know if you know about John Monteleone. He's on Long Island. He studied with D'Acquisto and all the archtop guys. He made this neck for me back then in 1981, and he made it arched for me at my request, and he made it bigger, and he made it out of mahogany. And when he coupled it with this old banjo, something great happened. Because you could have a great feeling neck that's perfect, feels good, and you put it on the instrument, and it just doesn't happen. But for some reason it happened. And then on top of that, I've played it since then. Since 81, this is the main banjo I've played. So it gets used to ringing, and it gets used to being played in every register, which if you only play on the white keys on the piano, the black keys aren't going to sound very good because the instrument isn't being used to being resonated on those frequencies. But in this banjo, since I play in all the keys and I'm all over the neck, it's quite used to being played, and it's fairly alive in most registers.
do you ever have to have it refretted? Have you ever had it refretted?
Although I went
'Cause the
to
frets look
stainless
like
steel.
Yeah, those are stainless steel frets.
Yeah, which have lasted
forever.
much longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Do
before
you
that I
like
used
the feel
nickel.
of stainless steel frets?
I can't say that I think it's better in terms of the sound or the feel, but the fact that I haven't had to have a fret job in like 12 years and they're still almost brand new is pretty hard to argue with. And in terms of whatever sound, yeah, sometimes I pick up one of my banjos that has nickel frets and I go, well, I think I can hear what I like about nickel. It's a 3 to 5% factor. And the other thing is, since a banjo is a machine and can be changed to the way you want it to sound, I've eventually incorporated the sound of the steel, of the stainless steel into the way I tweak the banjo. So I've got it sounding the way I want it to sound with stainless steel.
And about changing the head, do you ever change the head?
Yeah,
How often
I
do you
do.
that?
I do, and I talked to Earl Scruggs about this a lot. He lived about 2 miles from here, just up Franklin Road, where you probably came in. And he said that people argue about the heads. They say, "Oh yeah, you got to get a skin head. That's the real thing," But he said it was a nightmare, because every day he'd show up somewhere, he'd open up the case, he never knew what he was going to see. Sometimes it would be sagging, and he'd have to crank it up. He had to carry it around a light bulb on an electric socket
To heat it up.
and he would heat it up to try. But on a bad day, he would open it up and it would be split. And a head takes well more than a day to get
break in.
to get breaking in. So he would have to carry heads and put them on and be tightening all the way up to the show in between sets, just to be able to perform. And then he had to be careful if he was going to go to a different humidity area, a different temperature. Then he'd have to loosen it up so it didn't split. So he said the first day that he put on a plastic head, he never looked back. He said, yeah, you could talk about how great but those heads would sound good one day out of 20. This head sounds better than it sounded most days.
Right.
But that one day was pretty great, but it wasn't worth the hell he went through.
And how often do you actually have to tune that?
So I change it maybe 9 months to a year and a half, depending on. I'm always a little nervous to do it because it's an old instrument, but it's fine. And for the first month to 6 weeks, I'm going to just guess, I have to go around and tighten it less and less each time. And right now it's in a place where it's settled in pretty good. I put it on in the summer. It's starting to feel pretty good.
Wow.
Yeah. But there's a point when, and Earl Scruggs also said, I like a new head. Like, a lot of people are like, don't ever change the head once it sounds good. Well, I like the sparkle that it gives it. Probably partly because I like a dark banjo. I need the sparkle of a new head just to be heard and have presence. So the combination of a new head but nice and loose is a good thing for me.
Okay, I want to ask you too about your miking of it and how you choose the mics and the mic pre's to record your banjo, because
Sure.
I'm very interested in that. If you have a dark banjo, you have a ribbon mic there, and you have a condenser,
Right.
a KM84 there. No,
Right. Well, it depends what you're doing.
Yep.
So like when I was playing with Shakti, all I used was this ribbon mic because I was all by myself, and that banjo could be as big as I wanted it to be, which is pretty big. bigger than it really is, because this mic in proximity gives it a little bass boost, which I love, especially when I'm playing solo. If it's a thin sound out there, I'm not having a good time.
No.
So, but that would be a disaster if I was playing with a bluegrass band. You wouldn't hear a note I was playing. The fiddle and the mandolin and the dobro would completely wipe it out. So in that situation, I have to use something brighter. And I might use something like an 84.
Yep.
That would be a possibility. For live, I'm going to lean towards something a little bit brighter in bigger groups. When I play with Abby, I don't use the fathead. I don't.
Interesting.
Because she has very deep banjos, and they can wipe me out. So I have to make sure I have something clear enough because of my dark sound. She has a dark sound too, and so it's like voicing things. And then I like multiple mics. If I can get two mics, like there's a guy named Bill Wolf who was one of the great engineers of bluegrass music who recorded a lot of Tony Rice's records, which were spectacularly recorded.
Yeah.
He was a fan of double miking everything, but not placing them all over the place, just putting them right next to each other and getting a double vision view of what the instrument sounded like from its optimum spot. And that can be a great, and exactly the same mic. He said he'd rather have two of the same mic than one great mic and something else. He'd rather have two of the lesser mic.
Do you phase align them ever,
so
or do you?
I'm a geek, and I go in and I line up the waveforms because sometimes I'll use two, sometimes I've even done a recording where I was in that room with 6 mics on the banjo.
Okay.
And as you keep adding mics, the phase becomes more and more important. You
Yes.
have a couple of them, and you might get away with it if they're a little bit apart, and it might even sound good and give you some top. But once you start adding mic after mic, they've got to be lined up. So the waveforms all have to start in exactly the same place. And then you can have a lot of mics, and you can pan them, and each one can have a different color. And so in this case, it was something with me and Abigail, just the two of us, and I had space. She was on one side, I had the whole other side, and I could pan all the way from 100 to, say, 20 of the other side, and hers the same on the other way. And it sounded great. And it was a big sound where if you just had one mic of us on each side, it might have sounded a little small, even if beautifully recorded. It filled up the whole space.
When I came in, you had a third mic up here.
Right. I have the Sanken 100K mic, which I used on a session for an opera singer, Chuck Ainley, great engineer. Stuck it up there, and I'd never seen it. And when I came back to edit and listen to the takes, I was like, "What's that?" And so I got a pair of them, and so I use them for when I really need it to be bright and make sure. I'm also missing some highs after all these years of performing, mixing, and editing, and playing on stages with loud amps and earphones. You know, we play with earbuds. So I need to hear a little more highs than I used to, too. So it's not what everyone else is hearing, but it's helpful. Probably gets it closer to what other people want to hear, because other people don't want to hear it as dark as I do.
Well, I hear your banjo as being dark to me.
Yeah.
But maybe it's just because I'm not hearing all the high end that I used to hear.
Possible. I mean, it's dark for a banjo, but it's bright for another instrument.
When you're using those mics, what mic pre's are you going through?
I use the Graces a lot. They used to be my second choice, and I would use the Avalons.
Yeah.
I have several other
737s.
things. Yeah, they're great. The Avalons seem to have a certain magic to them that's lovely, but those Graces are just great. They're just perfect. I trust them. I know what they sound like. They don't surprise me with anything, and everything I've ever run through them sounded great. But we also have some Millennias, which I don't think sound as good. I have some Neves that don't sound as good. I don't think they're from the right period, or that maybe Rupert wasn't involved at this point. I have something called a Night Pro, which holds up quite well. I don't know if they're still made, but they're quite nice. They're very much like the Massenburg. But I love this stuff. There was a point when we were making records and engineers would say, "Well, you can't do that." I'd go, "Next engineer, you know, I don't want to be told I can't do something, or I'm not allowed to something. Or you can't get these balanced. What are you talking about? You can balance it, you know. I want it darker. No, you can't do that. It won't work. You know, whatever it is. I just wanted to find. It just made me want to have control of my own music. So I started engineering my own stuff, and I got to a point where I could do pretty good. And I love it. I love microphones, and I love editing and mixing and all that stuff.
So
and
you'll mix your own records too,
mostly,
right?
although
Yeah.
this last couple of records, just because of the sheer time it takes and the fact that I don't get to play the banjo if I'm mixing. I might have a month where I don't play, and then all of a sudden I got to play with one of these guys. The people that I play with are serious, so I got to show up and be good. So that's not going to work for the next portion of my life. I got to get help. So this album is the first time I've tried that, and I had two different mixers who helped me on the two projects, and they did a great job. Took a lot of notes, and they've turned out well. Now, I probably, if I had had the time and could have done them myself, I might think they might have turned out 5% better, just because of the sheer amount of time. Even though they're better engineers than me, because I would have spent so much time on it, but I don't have that kind of time, So it's time for me to embrace that.
And where's a definitive place for you to listen to these things? Is on your studio monitors here in the car? Where do you make your final decision on something?
It's a summing kind of thing, because you can't trust anything, because every time you go somewhere else, it's a whole different mix. So at some point, you have to be okay with the fact that it's not going to work for everybody in every space. But I used to use these Myers speakers a lot, because did you know Roger Nichols?
Yeah.
Yeah. Roger, we spent some time together, and he advised me to get a pair of them. He said, when you use these Myers and you reference with those, you bring it to the mastering engineer, and they don't have anything to do. It's already pretty much there. So what you're hearing is what you get. And I used them for 10, 15 years, for a long time, and I just started getting tired of them. And so I got these ATC ones, and then recently I get these Focals, and they're all fun, but I don't trust any of them like I trusted the Myers, because I knew it so well. And I also, because of this high end that I'm missing, I thought it was okay to get a little extra assistance in that area. So I've got some really nice headphone preamps and some really nice headphones that are better than most people would hear. But I think I need that, because my hearing is not as good as most people's anymore.
Do you listen on the phone? Because so many people listen on their phones. Will you play things on your phone?
Yeah, like for instance, there's this Edgar Zakir Rakesh piece that there's a video for that I did a mix for, and while they're working on the edits, I'm assessing the mix through my iPhone. And when I go to mix it, I'm going to do some kind of composite between what I hear on the speakers and what I knew it sounded like on the iPhone. Obviously, I'm going to have to turn up the bass and the low end of the tablets for it to sound good on iPhones, but I don't want it to sound terrible on other speakers, so you look for that middle ground, a little more than you would want, but still good, for the speakers.
Would you call yourself an audiophile?
I'm picky. I love when stuff sounds good.
Right.
I hate this idea that it doesn't matter what it sounds like. I mean, I do think that the better the music is, the less it matters, but I think there's something lovely about delivering something that really sounds gorgeous. That even if nobody can hear it, I know.
Wow.
I want to put, and it used to be that you would work on something till you were done, and nobody would hear it until you delivered it onto the world, and that seems to be a forgotten thing. It's like if we tape the live show. Flecktones used to always play new music on our shows. Then all of a sudden the internet came along, and now people started recording them, and by the time we recorded it, it was old news. Everyone had heard the song, and not only that, we'd put out the record, and they said, the first time they played it was better. It wasn't better. They just got used to it, and they fell in love with that version of it, which we all do with all kinds of recordings. But it was demoralizing. So we stopped, playing new music on the shows, and we would only do it at rehearsal and not play it on the shows.
Do you think it affects the way, because so many artists have told me the same thing, that the fact that they can't play things live now to try them out, to get people's response, because a lot of it is that they would craft the arrangements based on the audience response, which they don't get anymore, because they can't let the songs out there.
Right, you don't discover till you play the piece in front of an audience that they're going to want to applaud here, so you better leave a little space before you bring in the next thing, or they're never going to hear this next part of the song. That kind of stuff. But I'm also comfortable with the studio version being different from the live version, that you can change it live. I'm just not comfortable with the idea that you come to see the show and people say, wow, I love this music, and then the artist says, don't listen to the record. We didn't know it back then. It's not, the live show's so much better. I hate to hear that. To me, that means they didn't take the time, because you can get it to be great.
Right.
And I think if someone gets one of my records, I'm going to think it's really good. And when they come hear it live, it might be different, but not necessarily better. I want it to be. The other thing is it's a rehearsal for real life. Yeah. If you take the time to get it right, then the band learns. And pretty soon you're playing it better than that, because now you're working from here. Before you were working from here. That process of recording it means that you spend all this time figuring out what really wasn't quite working.
Is there one person, this is my last question to you, is there one person whose opinion you value the most to listen to something before you put it out?
Well, for a long time, it was Richard Dodd. Mm-hmm. You know Richard?
Yeah.
He recently closed up his studio and started doing stuff at home, and so I've started doing some different mastering things. But I love him, and he was always really good at catching things that I had missed. either because of my tinnitus or just because he could say at 2 minutes and 31 seconds point 4, the stereo image on the banjo changed. Can you go back and look at the tracks and see what happened there? And sure enough, there's a crossfade on one of the stereo mics and not the other. Wow. Or this whole mix feels like it's slightly to the left, or the bass is amorphous. Maybe it should be in mono. Everything else can be in stereo, but try putting it in the middle. Just something like that. Or the reverb suddenly cut off, or I hear a sound, or whatever. But also just the sort of, what do you think?
Right.
Do you think we've got something here? Do you think I need to go back to the drawing board? So I would always go to him before the record was done for a pre-mastering listen when I was like 90% done with the mix, and then I'd come back, and after listening in his studio with his ears and his notes, I could come back and make the adjustments, and it was ready to go. The other person is Abigail, because she listens to it as a human being that likes music, but isn't, like I want my music to appeal to people that don't listen to jazz or modern classical music or world music. She's a lot more sophisticated than she used to be, but she's always had great taste. So if she comes in and listens, a lot of times I don't want anyone to hear it till it's really, really done. I'm okay if nobody ever hears it, as long as I think it's good. But if she comes to hear it, it matters to me what she thinks.
Well, Béla, it's been a pleasure to sit here with you, and an honor to meet you in person.
Thank you.
And
Same here.
And hear you play this close is great.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for caring about what I do.
Cool.
It's a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.